The following episode contains or may contain spoilers. So if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in. Welcome to the Phantom Zone. 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm Noah.
I'm Kayla.
I'm Jared.
And today we have a super special episode, and in light of what this month is, we decided it would be good to spotlight Indigenous people in comics, because they don't get enough recognition, and with the small little tiny itty bitty platform that we have, we thought we would
call attention to some of the cool characters and some of the issues that the industry might be able to work past.
Mm-hmm. The many issues that they still need to
we're gonna call attention to the lack of attention.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna do.
The conspicuous lack of characters.
That's right. And I feel the need, and I think we should sort of begin with a little why are we talking about this preamble? I think a lot of the listeners are like, wait a second, you guys aren't Native American, and you're correct. We are not.
Right.
We are white people. And I think there's always this weird criticism, which is a fair thing that we should probably address, which is what business do a bunch of white people have to talk about, Native Americans in comic books or indigenous people in comics? And here's the thing, we don't. We don't have any business speaking for anybody else.
Of course not.
Right?
No.
But the thing is that this is an interesting lens that we need to talk through comic books. And I'll tell you what, I only speak for myself here. I can't speak for anybody but sneaky white people. And as a sneaky white person, I'll tell you this, when white people pull that move where they're like, we just need to listen to other people right now. It's like, that's true, it's good to listen. But a lot of white people do that to avoid difficult racial discussions.
Right.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
It's a problem that I encountered a lot when I was starting to take my writing very seriously. If a white author is limiting themselves to just writing white characters, you're just perpetuating the amount of, inequality in representation. So the way it's been told to me was I can have white characters, I can have black characters, Native American characters. I just can't tell black stories, Native American stories, because that's not where I come from. So they're, as long as those characters are part of my world, but I'm not trying to give voice to the black experience or the Native American experience, then you know what I mean. So we're not here to talk about what it should look like. We're not talking about individual Navajo experience. We're just talking about characters that have indigenous backgrounds that we really enjoy, and we would like to see more of them in comics.
And we're pointing out the problems that they have, because we can definitely speak to that, the lack of, because we all come from some type of diverse minority in some shape or fashion. I'm not too sure where Jared comes from, but the tests are still coming back on that one.
You guys, I'm going to come out of the closet. I am from Venus. That is true. No, but I mean, you're absolutely right. We have done other episodes that included other minorities in some cases, identity groups we are part of. And I have to admit, some of the parallels that I saw in the LGBTQ episode that we did, obviously not all of them, not even maybe most of them, but especially in this notion of there's an attempt at inclusion. And then there's, that has usually, let's say, a rugged history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I wanted to say was when, we did some research for this, and that's the other thing that's really cool. We're in the process of learning, and that's what we got to do in this episode as well. One of the things I had learned, and I always suspected, but I think you guys concur, is that the dramatic lack or absence of American Indians, Native Americans.
Normally, I at least have an idea of who I'm going to spotlight when we come up with an episode topic. And you're right. I hadn't been exposed to very many indigenous characters, so I had no idea until I did some research who I wanted to spotlight in the first place. So yeah, I couldn't even think of a character off the top of my head.
Oh, by the way, I should say something about that. So just in terms of language, we also did a fair amount of research because, look, I mean, I want to call people what they'd like to be called. That's just the fact. But we found in our research that Indigenous Americans was the term that seemed to be the least maligned. seem
The
to
least
be
offensive.
The least offensive. But the truth is that there's no unified term.
Right.
And different groups. It turns out the older people, especially people over 50, often prefer Indian and have taken issue with terms like Native American and even Indigenous American, oftentimes because these are either neologisms or they're even worse, sometimes governmentally mandated sort of terminology and things like that. So unlike, certain minority groups, like, as a gay man, I found that like when you're talking about at least about gay men, you can just say gay and you're going to not offend 90%. Unfortunately, there's no real unified term. And moreover, many people want to be known as their tribal name, specific groups that they're a part of. The problem is that when talking about the larger ethnicity, it doesn't really work. There are over 530 different Indian tribes. We can't name them all. I'd like to. Especially
when we get into our spotlights, it's literally spotlighting that character from that specific tribe. Or wherever they come from. So, I mean, of course, that's what makes these challenging, but in a good way, but also hopefully by the listeners listening to this, they learn something, like even just within the first 5 minutes of this episode that, if they prefer to be called by their tribe name, call them by their tribe name. So, I mean, it's...
Oh, yeah. And by the way, I mean, I have to say, that we're dedicated, like I think it's a complicated set of issues when we talk about representation, we talk about equality, we talk about inclusion, but everyone here to some degree or another, I mean on the podcast and hopefully our fans, is committed to increased representation. I think we all think that's important. If you don't think that's important, maybe go ahead and hit that unsubscribe button. And then next to that button, maybe hit the go fuck yourself button. How about that? Okay, cool.
I mean, by now, if they haven't figured out that
they're listening to two gay men and a woman.
Yeah. And just people that are trying their best to not be pieces of shit.
Right. Okay. I mean, if you look at the cast of characters in comics and you don't see a problem with like 90% of them being straight white males, then I mean, there's a problem there. So...
Julie Murphy episode helped me articulate to myself, I mean, and not just us doing the episode, but just talking to Julie Murphy about just the idea of like what it means to have heroes. If you're a person and you look out to the world and you don't see heroes to represent you, it says something about what society's saying, the kinds of people capable of heroism. It's a way bigger issue. And don't get me wrong.
Lifting up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's, I don't want to replace, real change in the world for symbolic change and stuff like that. But either way, we're into superheroes.
This is a comic book podcast, so through the lens of comic books.
Getting into specifics here, like I said, we found a curious lack of American Indian or Native American representation, specifically in DC. Now, again, I don't want to sound too partisan. I think because I'm a big Marvel boy, we all know that. but I do think that some of it's arbitrary. The reason being, in other words, it's not so much that Marvel's had a better committed attitude or DC's had some of it's just Marvel's characters that they've introduced.
They've caught on.
Exactly. They've had better traction. Some of it's because of their strategies. Like some of them it's because of like the X-Men, I think, have a particularly good record with American Indian representation. I mean, and they don't have a great record, I'll be honest. But
that's true. That's one of the cool things about the X-Men is that, they usually typically focus on a core group of X-Men regularly, but the X-Men is so huge and their roster is so big and they include everything and everyone within any given X-Men character. You can just pick from it. Like, if you want a Indigenous person, if you want a black person, if you want a gay person, you can pull from it.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's the cool thing about the X-Men is that they're there.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Based on what the X-Men represent.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I mean, you've both sort of like congealed to a great point. Two good points, a great point. Anyway.
X-Men are awesome is my point.
Because like you sort of indicate, it's about this ideology of difference. It's about, like, it has an ideological strand of sort of like people who are maybe underrepresented or under attack or, an opposite end of oppression. So the X-Men sort of ethos is already prepared to at least try to integrate.
Yeah.
You just have to get a writer to actually write them.
That's right.
They're there, but you got to write them.
Before we get into our spotlights, we'll probably talk a little bit about what we think would kind of help this issue or be like, what we've learned about representation generally and how to apply it to like further representation or whatever. I mean, this difficult thing about this topic, honestly, is like I almost don't know where to start because there's really so much going on here. I mean, so one thing I was going to say, I think some of even though Marvel has had a little bit more representation, let's face it, especially early on, the representation has been either negative.
Yeah.
Or it's been like kind of in the realm of what I would think of as like two-dimensional or like positive-y stereotypes.
That is something we've learned by tracking and the history of minority groups in comics is that their first attempts by any major studios, Marvel, DC, Image, whatever, they try. They really do. But it tends to fall back on stereotypes, on shorthands to integrate that character. And normally if that character catches on or if they're part of a really popular team, then maybe they'll be carried through and given some 3D maybe 2 decades after they're introduced. If not, the better representation for these characters are going to come in at least after 2000.
Yeah, I'm always curious I know back then, like especially in the 70s and stuff like that, I guarantee you they had no consultants at all with people in those minorities.
I mean, let alone an Indigenous person on staff.
Exactly. And especially during the times, the 60s and 70s, they definitely didn't have anybody like that. But even now, so I'm not sure if now the reason why they're not writing them is because they're not there. And now there's this whole culture of like, oh, well, now you're just pushing this thing down my throat type of thing. But it's like, well, okay, so these people have to be represented, or somebody wants to write the story. You need to get people that have that experience to write that story. I mean, part of the reason why Kamala Khan so well is look who wrote Kamala Khan. I mean, look who wrote these characters that they can speak to them and their experiences. And I think that needs to be a huge push to do this and for everybody to accept it, really.
The hiring aspect is huge. We've talked about that a lot. I mean, there's no way around it. That there's I don't think it's the only thing. Like, so right. I think that white writers shouldn't hesitate to integrate at some level Native American, Indigenous people. By the way, I just keep saying as many appropriate words as possible. I don't know, but so they can't be tasked with the only time, and we don't want to go down this road where there's actually this weird just like segregation where white people write people and black people write black characters, and like that's not a world we want to live in either. But certainly just, I mean, first of all, even away from so we get better characters, we want Native American people to be able to be hired at equal amount, just generally, in every profession.
That's what I was meaning by getting to that point of like, if they weren't going to hire them or if somebody was tasked to write that, then get somebody that actually knows that to help you write it. You know what like, it's weird that I feel like that doesn't happen because then we run into those stereotypes or those really offensive ways of writing a character. I mean, especially LGBTQ people, I've read some stuff where I'm like, this person clearly has no idea what they're talking about when they're talking about gay people.
Oh, yeah. That it's just completely divorced from... I mean, sometimes it's annoying, even in the 80s, when people are less conscious about these things. It's annoying because you'll read stuff and it's like, oh, if you guys had just read a fucking book,
right?
You could have avoided some of this stuff. But, I mean, we'll get into those details. But, I mean, I think some of it I look at like this weird challenge that takes place, especially in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s, where people recognize there's just not representation for different groups. In this specific case, for Indigenous Americans, there's just not as much representation. So then there's a call for it. And where that call comes from, there's often like a ham-handed response. Yeah. So writers say, okay, and editors say, we need Indian characters. We need American Indian characters to be in the comic books. And so then when they create these characters, they don't just have them be normal people that have to be. They're trying to show that they're doing, we're serious about integration and serious about representation. And so the characters that they create often have all these stereotypical trappings of Native Americans. So, you'll see things like they'll have their weaponry is like bow and arrows and knives and
tomahawk.
Absolutely. And their regalia is often like headdresses. By the way, not to mention a lot of the appearance is very specific to like Great Plains Indians.
Right. Yeah. Not even going outside of the region. It's like, just look up north, I don't think that's what they're wearing.
That's right. Yeah. And so you can see this like 50-50 or this like tension where they want to say, look, I'm showing you the representation of a positive sort of thing. But so they have to, what's the form language to do that? And the form language is often what we associate. And look, some of them aren't negative stereotypes. Some of them even stereotypes adopted by Native American people even to this day. So it's not as clean as just saying this is all completely fictional.
Right.
I don't know if you guys saw this, but I thought it was interesting. I really wish I had memorized the guy's name, but we'll put it on the blog. There was an artist recently who got commissioned by Marvel to do all these covers. And he's a Native American himself, right?
Right.
And so he does versions of Thor and the Hulk and Wolverine and Spider-Man and so on and so on. Maybe like 16 of these somewhere in that neighborhood.
Awesome.
Beautiful stuff, but it has the trappings of what we would consider, like, it's not even a matter of saying stereotypes, just like the visual tropes and iconography of a lot of, Indian culture and mythology and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like you see in his hands, it's not meant as a stereotype, and it's not even like a completely, like, it's not fakery. It's, him sort of...
fakery.
Yeah. Because, there's definitely a lot of... I even, the character I'm going to spotlight, there's a lot of white ahistoricity where it's like, oh, this sounds like something an Indian would be, and it's just completely off base, but,
Yeah. These stereotypes are often shorthanded in their power sets.
Especially
at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Like shamanistic magic, astral
Absolutely.
projection, tracking, things of that nature. You said size changing, and that just comes out of nowhere to me.
It's so crazy. So the first thing you said I wanted to mention, because all of us happen to pick characters whose powers fall into this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And look, there's nothing you could do about it. I mean, look, a lot of it too is that I've found that what happens is these characters, sometimes they are written, they begin as these really awful stereotypes, but then they still exist and they're taken up by better writers, sometimes Native American writers themselves, and then they're given greater life. And because they've been around for so long, then they were also, in many cases, the only forms of representation, they still become beloved despite the fact that they have kind of ignoble, let's face it, gross origins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they tend to try to get away from that stuff.
Yes.
Especially nowadays. They're like, that never happened. It did happen, but we'll never talk about it again. We'll just give them a new costume. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
But let's run down that a bit, because because Kelly's right to indicate it, and I think it's very conspicuous when you're first reading comic books, is that, so some of it is sort of like the obvious stuff, sort of like shamanistic religious powers, whether it's sort of like, even if it's not a magic ability they have, it's often...
They're communing with spirits or things
absolutely. And a lot of that comes from, obviously, like, stereotypes. Some of it comes from the very real animistic religions that are accurately associated with indigenous people. But again, it's this weird thing where it's like, why does that character's power have to be connected to their ethnicity?
Well, I think it's interesting that on the face of it, it might look like stereotyping, but I think depending on how they got their powers, then I think then we can really determine, like, okay, that made sense because they got it because of this. But if they're just a mutant and their, for some reason, power is in that stereotype, it's like, well, okay, I mean...
It could have been anything, though.
Yeah, so... Did Pyro get the ability to control fire because white people are so angry all the time? Like, I don't know.
Oh gosh, white men are so angry.
But honestly, to give some examples here, there are some characters that, like, and I'm glad you pointed this out, because I think it's a weird reversal in this way where it's like, mutant powers are supposed to be random.
Right, exactly.
And so it's almost worse when the random power ends up complementing the ethnicity. You know what I mean? So, for instance, like, there are characters we're going to talk about that are use shamanistic magic to gain powers. And it's, look, as obviously stereotypical that is in certain ways, in other ways, at least it makes sense to the it's like the person was into a kind of magic associated with their people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but then you get characters like Forge, where... I mean, their abilities really have nothing to do with their ethnicity. I mean,
Forge is I don't know that Forge is the perfect character in this regard. generally, but in this regard, he is, which is that he is a mutant. If you don't know, Forge is a sort of like B-level, though very cool X-Men character.
Nice hair.
who has the ability, essentially, is like a kind of automatic techno genius.
Right.
He can build almost anything he can imagine, and he automatically knows how to make any machine, no matter how wondrous or whatever. He's really smart.
Reminds me of the Lego movie. I can build it.
Yes.
What are they called?
Yes.
Master builders?
Yeah, Forge is a master builder, absolutely.
With really nice hair.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I will say, if you know anything about the character, they actually did, unfortunately, and sometimes I think writers just need to go somewhere with something. They did add some like shamanistic magic in his background. This is also just a brief aside. Forge is a Cheyenne character. It's part of the Cheyenne Nation dominates Marvel indigenous people. I still do not know why. I literally tried to look it up.
Because of Forge.
Yeah.
Like,
Maybe they wanted to tie him to characters from his.
yeah.
I think Danny Moonstar is another character. Also known as Mirage. She's one of those characters that like her name is.
Doesn't she have like 7 different names?
Yeah, because it's like the Kitty Pryde thing or the Jean Grey thing, which like the name itself is cool and it's better than the code name. So
nobody calls her by her
Yeah.
code name. They're like, your name is Danny Moonstar, and that's what we're gonna call you.
This is also an entire other episode because I got to tell you, I think it's something they just do to women, and you could say it's good or bad. But Monica Rambeau is another character.
Depending, her mantle doesn't matter.
But anyway, okay, so.
Kayla's face.
But so, like I said, we have the shamanistic religion powers that often get sort of associated with indigenous characters. We also have stuff like nature powers, the natural ability stuff, or like the connection to.
Yeah, I think that one can, depending on how it's being used, I think depends. You know, so I mean, because there's so
a
many.
positive version of all of these, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, we're towing the line between stereotypes and actual cultural like heritage representation.
Right.
That's right. But I will say, in a kind of broad, kind of like literary or philosophical or anthropological tradition, there has been this unfortunate connection of people of color, so there's non-white people essentially being associated with kind of the natural elements, and white people being sort of connected to reason and rationality that conquers those elements.
And
so
cosmic.
it's like, yes, exactly. So it's not to say that is necessarily always, a sin to do that, just that there is this trend.
But fuck colonialism.
Exactly. That there's a colonial aspect here that you kind of can't avoid.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just one big like Parks and Rec episode half the time with Native American people.
Could you unpack that a little bit?
I love that reference.
It's more of like they're writing this because they know it's wrong, but they do it anyway because how else are you supposed to be writing these people? Because you're white and you're writing these people how you think these people are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's Parks and Rec, but it's like satire. So
No, I totally, yeah. And look, I mean, there's an accuracy to that about like, so Marvel recently has launched a new thing because it's Native American Heritage Month. And they've launched a thing called Marvel Voices, Indigenous Voices. I hope it's going to be more than one issue.
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, I'm being honest. I don't think it is. Yeah.
Maybe they'll listen to this episode and change their mind.
Yeah. I mean, again, we're Marvel, just like hire us and let us fix your shit. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen. And I hope it does at some point. But if any company is going to do it, I would say Marvel would probably do it. Will they do it well? I don't know, because there's been a lot of failed attempts in the past. So we'll see. I mean, I mean, it's good that they're doing it regardless.
At this point, you got to start somewhere.
Right,
so if
exactly.
it's one issue this year, it's 7. It's a 6-issue miniseries the following year, and then hopefully.
Right.
Well, yeah, but I think we could sort of talk about how to do it. I think that like we're not completely absent of, ideas about that, because I was going to say one thing that bothers me is, this sort of like they're doing this ensemble cast. Like these are all of our Indian characters that we want to feature. But I mean, it's annoying because I think that it's like I think it's 1.5% of the population of the United States is Native American. That's about 4 million people, somewhere in that territory. And that's a relatively small market for the likes of Marvel and DC. And unfortunately, that's what steers them in a lot of ways. And it gets really annoying for me because, like, they love to pat themselves on the back about their representation and stuff like that. But you don't see a tremendous commitment to it. And the reason that this annoys me is we know how to do it now, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, like, and here's my word is protagonize. We have to protagonize, characters to create representation.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Kayla. I was like,
No.
Kayla, okay.
But I mean, like, so what we've seen, and it's not just American Indians that deal with this, but this is generally the problem is that, like, they'll put them on ensemble casts. They'll have them be interesting, supportive characters. They'll have them in miniseries. But what they don't do...
They won't carry a series. They won't lead it.
Like, it's not a mystery. Take a character, especially one that has a developed history, put them in an ongoing series, put top talent on it, and here's the big one: lose money on it. Not forever, but you have to put money into that. You have to potentially, for the first 6 issues, it might not sell.
You're investing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes back to what Kayla said. I mean, you have to start somewhere, and you have to do that. I mean, but they're never going to spend money or spotlight characters, especially ongoing series. Mm-hmm. Like ongoing series, not just like minis or like, you know, contain stories with anybody outside of characters that they know will sell no matter what. And that's just the facts.
Well, that's the fact, but this is my point, which is then they can shut the fuck up about caring about representation.
Right.
And that's true. Yeah. If the idea is they're just like, we're a publishing house, we sell what people buy, I'm like, okay, good. Well, then you don't get to market yourself as like, we're in this together.
They are, and I hope that in the movie aspect or in the other medias that they do, it seems like they're leaning more towards doing that and actually following through with it. And I think that's a smart way to do it now, especially with Marvel's platform they have. Everybody's going to go see their movies.
That's where you can make some money.
Exactly. You get people excited about these characters. Look at Captain Marvel. I mean, Captain Marvel, everybody knew who she was. But once her movie came out, everybody knew who she was.
Hell
so,
yeah.
I mean, same thing with Thor and
Should have been a black woman. No, sorry.
I mean...
Rambo is coming.
She's going to be in WandaVision, so I mean, there you go.
Hell yeah. No, you're absolutely right, though.
She is?
Yeah.
That's a pleasant surprise for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so what we can do is buy Indigenous voices.
Right.
I mean, spotlight freaking awesome characters.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to get into spotlights, and I will kick it off. And so the spotlights we did were ones that we... at least for me, that I thought, you know, could be bigger in comics or could be fixed.
You're like, there's potential here.
Exactly. So the character I picked was Shaman. And he first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 120 in 1979. And the way you can think about him is he's essentially like a Native American equivalent to Doctor Strange. So, I mean, his magic is...
You found the one character that's like Doctor Strange. Okay.
If Kayla always tries to relate back to Batman, I'm always trying to relate back to Doctor Strange in some way. Or the Flash, yeah. So, Dr. Michael Two Young Men, that's the shaman's name, a member of the Tsutsuiana tribe, and I'm guessing that's how it's said. I don't want to butcher the name. I'm just letting you guys know I do not know how to say that tribe's name. They're actually the First Nation band government in Alberta, Canada, reserve number 145. So this is a Canadian, Indigenous person. So I thought it was also really cool to give them some recognition as well, because it's not just in America. I know comics like to only talk about Americans, and that's not the case. So he actually became an accomplished doctor outside of the tribe and medicine as well. His father, who was a tribal medicine man, asked him to take on the role of the tribe medicine man. But Michael was like, nah, I'm good. I don't really want to do that. Because he didn't believe in magic. He was more of a science type guy. A lot like Doctor Strange in a way.
And Dr. Voodoo, by the way.
Yep. So... fast forward a little bit, Michael's wife was dying in a hospital, and his daughter made him to promise to do whatever it took to keep the wife alive. Well, he fails and loses both his wife and his father, coincidentally, in the same day.
Oh, great, wonderful.
So, as heroes do, they need tragedy to push them into what was fated for them this whole time, and it was foreshadowed in the beginning, to become the medicine doctor man. So due to his losses, he isolated himself in Banff National Park. And while there, he was dealing with all his emotions. He actually had a vision of his grandfather. So this goes back to his roots from his tribe and his heritage. From then on, he begins to study the magic of his people, eventually becoming strong enough to draw items from his magical medicine pouch. Thus, the shaman was born. So, shaman's abilities really come from this medicine pouch he has. And how do I explain this? You know Harry Potter?
Do I?
And Hermione's ever-expanding bag that she has, particularly towards the end of the series, that's what he has. But the items pulled out are it's limited to what can fit through the opening. So I think that's a cool, weakness.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good way to, shorten, he can't pull, an elephant out of it. He can only pull, a baby elephant. I don't know.
A fetus.
Oh, no. So Shaman later joined the Canadian super team Alpha Flight, which I don't think they also get enough recognition. I think Alpha Flight's a really cool team. It's totally out there. If you like Excalibur, I usually akin them to them because they feel like the normal team, like Avengers and X-Men, but it's in a different setting and different people. So it's
also how we know Shaman, really.
Exactly.
From Alpha Flight. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then I did want to mention, because I did write this down, that the bag itself, nobody can see the contents without losing their soul. So only the shaman can actually look into his bag to see what he can pull out.
That's got a Thor's hammer sort of thing to it, where there's a worthiness enchantment almost.
Exactly. And I like, too, that they included androids in this, that even if it's a non-human, it will just look empty. It will look like just a regular bag. So I'm like, no, that's pretty cool. So nobody can use his magical medicine pouch. But yeah, I mean, that's really Shaman, unfortunately. So that was really his big stint. So his main introduction was during that. Later on, he did die during the Chaos War. He was brought back and died and brought back again when the whole Alpha Flight was brought back as well. As these B teams usually are, like a Doom Patrol, they're never involved in anything big, but shown in the background. But I mean, I think Shaman's really cool. He's helped Doctor Strange quite a few times. Even in Jason Aaron's run, he showed up a few times. But I mean, I would like more Shaman.
He's in that almost what I think of the pentagram around Doctor Strange. There's 4 or 5 mages that Marvel regards as it's usually Brother Voodoo, Scarlet Witch, maybe Agatha Harkness, maybe get some magic in there, MAGIK characters that sort of represent. They're the second tier magicians, second usually only to
the different
Doctor Strange.
types of magic, the different types, and that's the one thing that I want to say Marvel does really well is that they usually have these what do I want to say, these avatars of that type of magic.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning his stint on the Alpha Flight. Even though that's a minor team, he was relatively crucial to the team. And so you get a more developed character than a lot of the other characters we could mention that often, a lot of Indigenous characters end up only being sidekicks for very short periods of time.
Right.
Sort of flash in the pan supporting characters or story dependent characters. So at least with Shaman, he got this sort of period of time where he gets worked out as a character over issues after issue.
Yeah, and it was very hard to not pick one that I liked, but pick one that... I mean, most of these characters, especially Indigenous people in these comic books, don't have huge histories. They have their first appearance and maybe some stories where they had a bigger purpose, but it's always in ensemble teams.
Yeah.
I can't point to, read Shaman number, you know what I mean? It's read this ensemble team to find this character and read the one issue that they really meant something.
We gotta protagonize.
Exactly. And we bang this drum a lot, but it's actually pretty important to have heroes, because the thing too is it's also, I should have mentioned this earlier, that Jason Aaron's Scalped was a very popular comic book.
Right.
But the problem is that that's film noir essentially in comic form. It's there's been plenty of books written that feature American Indians, Native American people, what have you. They're missing from the superhero genre, and that's the point.
Yeah. It's also stories that they're missing. I
Yes.
just want to put that out. I mean, it's different stories that we could be getting. So I'm
That's
done.
true.
That's Shaman. My spotlight's done.
Hell yeah.
Nice. So I know that I'm next. I'm super excited to talk about Sarah Rainmaker. They requested I do someone from the DC universe, so she's from there. She's from specifically the Wildstorm universe. Most people's intro into this is the Authority, which, of course, Noah brings up Apollo and Midnighter a lot. So
Hell yeah.
if you've read them, that's the Authority, and that's the Wildstorm universe. All right. And also, Rainmaker is her last name. Shake off the cringe, and let's get going, because she's a really cool character. And she's had some impressive talent on her, too, which is why I feel like she really is probably one of DC's like strongest female representation. She was created by Jim Lee.
Name drop.
yeah. Brandon Troy and J. Scott Campbell. She first appeared in Gen 13 number 2 in 1994, specifically Image Comics, so the umbrella there. She was reintroduced into the DC universe in the New 52, which is one of my favorite eras, in Movement number 3 by Gail Simone and Freddie Williams. So Gail Simone, Jim Lee, some talent there, name dropping.
The interesting thing, I just want to say the interesting thing about Wildstorm is that these characters have like property jumped so much. And it's like what you were saying, it's like, oh, Wildstorm comics, but Image Comics, but also DC.
They were introduced in DC. Yeah. That's why I did the whole spiel. Normally I'm like, they were introduced in blah, 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 issue number blah. But her history, again, has been interesting. I guess just like you had said, the Wildstorm history has been interesting. But, in general, they've been trying to tackle representation a little bit harder than DC main continuity.
They do a better job, too.
Yeah, exactly. So Sarah has weather manipulating powers. Think of it as she basically has Storm's power set. So she can manipulate rain, lightning, tides, that type of stuff. She's with a group of metahumans called Gen 13. And they're basically like a Teen Titans-esque group because they're like a teenage team, younger team, struggling with their powers in Wildstorm's basically premier like Teen Titans teenage group. So she is half Apache. She's a metahuman, so it's not like she gains it spiritually. It's closer to like an X-Men type origin. So when she enters the main continuity into DC, because there's basically Sarah Part 1, where she was under Image Comics, with the Gen 13 group, basically her role in the team was to be the weather powerhouse, but she was also bisexual. She had a crush on the team leader, and it was an unrequited crush. That's basically all that she got fleshed out with. She did have a lot of stories centered around her San Carlos reservation in Arizona for the Apache. She was rebooted along with the rest of the team in the New 52, where she was officially established as a lesbian in continuity. So,
yay.
Yeah, right? Representation on two fronts there.
Because Native Americans can be gay, too.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's why I was saying Wildstorm just does a better job of trying to tackle representation. And she found it difficult to integrate in society. She comes home one day to find her parents, who are actually operatives who were ordered to raise her, ingested poison, and they're dead. Then she's escorted. Immediately, troops storm the house, and she's taken away. She is in a detention center, meets up with the other Gen 13 gang, and they all escape. Kind of a la... oh my god, their names escape me.
Prison
Guardians
Break?
of the Galaxy group, like ragtag. We're in jail. Let's escape together.
Right.
And during the adventures, they realize that this iteration, she has the soul of her original namesake, and they all.
Oh, that's cool. Random.
Yeah, it is. Current Sarah Rainmaker lives in a block of Coral City, and the people in her neighborhood really look up to her. It reminds me a lot, again, of kind of Storm's origin from before she joined the X-Men in Africa. And she reluctantly, in the new comics, helps a team called the Movement. She does interact with old Gen 13 teammates, but she prefers basically her and her people to be left alone. She does, however, give time to the Movement leader, Virtue. This time her love is not unrequited, so they've gone on a couple of dates. And they seem to be a couple now, so I just feel like there's a lot of potential. Her aesthetic, again, she's so beautiful. I want to be Rainmaker. When I did this research, I knew that Sarah Rainmaker had the potential to just I feel like she could catch fire if more attention was put into her. She's had some really good talent on her. And again, DC's been trying to immigrate Wildstorm into main continuity, and it's worked with characters like Midnighter specifically. They should push for Sarah next, is my vote. So that's my spotlight. Sarah Rainmaker, guys, come on.
Yay!
Well, they need to bring Midnighter back. I mean, I think he's here, but he's not here. I don't know. Anyway.
I was just like, he popped up in Grayson comics.
That's true. But in the New 52.
I love the New 52.
I do too, but it's done. It's over. Anyway, Jared's turn.
Okay, well, my spotlight, the character I chose was American Eagle.
I love the picture you have on the dock for him, too.
I do too. It's great. We'll get into just that picture. It's him with a motorcycle, because he has a motorcycle
And
a lot of times now.
Cool hat with leather gloves.
It's very cool. Very cool. Also, like, I think it would be great if his name's American Eagle, but if he had like a sidekick called like Gap or whatever. And like, not for real, but it would be great if I...
Old Navy.
Yeah, if I was right, he would join the Old Navy. No, but if I was writing that character, I would totally have like a little superhuman dude trying to be his sidekick named Gap. Like, I'm Gap. It's like, get out of here. Okay, anyway. So honestly, I believe, especially recently, American Eagle, aka Jason Strongbow, is Marvel's premier American Indian character. Now, there are a bunch of them, but like I said, Jason's going to get featured in Indigenous Voices coming up, so I hope we get more of him. His story, I mean, basically his story is this. He's a Navajo character, and he and his brother... I should say, I've been trying to get in this habit that Kayla does. Yeah, it's not going to work out great, so strap in. But I did want to start doing this because Kayla does it a lot. And we don't have to do it, but anyway, so he first appeared in Marvel 2-in-1, annual number 6.
I feel like it's important context.
It is, in October 1981, and he was created by writers Doug Minnick and artist Rob Wilson. In this case, the reason I thought it was interesting specifically was just because, so much has changed with Indian representation, so I thought, okay, so he comes in the 80s, you guys will know that. Anyway, so the idea... He
looks like he comes from the 80s.
Well, actually, the picture you guys are looking at is current, so maybe it's just...
Okay,
it's an update. Anyway, so Jason Strongbow is part of the Navajo Nation, and he's sort of like their great hero, or at least he becomes that. And the idea is that he and his brother Ward Strongbow were protesting these miners that were trying to develop a mountain that their people considered sacred. Right?
Reasonable.
Yeah, pretty reasonable. The problem is that those mountains happen to be filled with uranium. Right?
Oh my God.
Gets worse, because not only did it attract developers, it also attracted the villainous, the malevolent supervillain Claw. Right? Yeah, that Dutch prick Claw.
What was the episode where you talked about Claw, and I just you kept trying to say how amazing he was?
He is amazing.
I can't get past what he looks like.
He's amazing. He was undersold in Black Panther. He's great in it. Andy Serkis was awesome. I just wish he hadn't got killed so quickly. But
he was better in Black Panther than he was in the comics. I'm just saying.
He wasn't. Well, maybe he was. He was great. And it's hard to compete with Andy Serkis. Anyway.
Right.
So Claw wants the uranium because it's going to augment his sonic power. Who knows how that works? But there's a confrontation between Jason and his people, and then the miners, and especially Claw. And Claw attacks them with the sonic power, and it creates a cave-in and nearly kills everybody. But it turns out that the combination of this rare uranium isotopes energy and Claw's own sonic energy, Claw's like a sonic villain, right? They combine to mutate Jason's physiology. Now, this is what I call the energy synergy. And the reason I say that is in comics, if two energies come together near you, you are getting powers. That is how that shit works. I don't know why. But if it's like, he was eating a magic sandwich and he got struck by lightning, it's like you're going to be able to hear people's thoughts. That is just going to happen. Speaking of which, his powers, he has what I call stas. I've come up with an acronym. It's what they call BRICS, but I call it STAS because it's strength, toughness, agility, stamina, and speed.
You can't Shazam this.
I did. I am. I'm Shazamming it. the total, basically, it's just such a common power set. So that's the power set he gets. And he's about Spider-Man level with it. 15 tons or so, runs at about 65 miles per hour. He gets a few extra things too. He has super senses. Not necessarily at Daredevil level, but like he can see really far, hear very sensitively. You get it, that kind of thing.
My boy.
Exactly. Daredevil. Yeah, he is. He also, I don't know why, he gets a crossbow. That's part of his superhero set. He gets a crossbow. Because I think they were like, well, he needs like a more updated bow and arrow. But I don't think Native Americans really used crossbows. I think that was more of a medieval European thing. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely a medieval European thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kong conquered all of Asia.
Yeah. But anyway, so he... his brother is kidnapped after he escapes
Ward.
Ward's gone. So from the mountains, he comes out of the mountain, and then he sees basically he sees an eagle flying in the sky, and he sees it as like a good omen from destiny, and he's inspired by it, so he calls himself American Eagle. I guess thank God he didn't see a possum or an iguana, or we'd have like power possum or indigenous iguana.
Been pretty cool though.
Not really, but I mean, okay. Well, and honestly, his costume early on is pretty bad. He's got it's like blue spandex with this gigantic headdress. I mean, it screams American Indian, but it's not the most practical affair, and it looks kind of gaudy. I secretly kind of like it, but I understand exactly why they had to get rid of it. But anyway, so when he gets out of the rubble or whatever, he chases Clawsman to the Savage Land, where he teams up with the Thing and Wyatt Wingfoot, who is also an American Indian, who is the Fantastic Four's pilot, which is kind of interesting, and Kazar at the Savage Land, and they defeat Claw, but sadly, Ward is killed by one of the miners. Yeah.
No!
What's a superhero?
Brother!
What's a superhero origin without a familial death? That's just how it works. Mm-hmm. And right before he dies, Ward tells Jason that with great power comes great responsibility. Okay, now that doesn't happen, but I feel like it's implied. It's very much like part of the story. So anyway, and that's kind of American Eagle's origin. He goes back to Arizona, and he kind of becomes the protector of his people, the protector and hero of the Navajo people. And honestly, he was kind of used after this in a really like kind of tokenistic way. Like anytime Marvel wanted to do kind of diversity push or something like that, like they had this big event in the 80s called Contest of Champions, where characters from all over the world like fought each other, especially like the heroes we familiar with. Like there was Sabra from Israel and like some shamrocked girl from Ireland or whatever, I can't remember her name, and they'd have him come out, but there were a few crucial stories where this character really got fleshed out and defined, and the one I just have to talk about briefly is, I won't go into the story, but Warren Ellis and Mike Deodato and their Thunderbolts run brought him back and redesigned him entirely. But I think it's a beautiful thing because not only does the story they tell make him very complicated and very funny too. He has a very like dry sense of humor. They also take all the stereotypical trappings away and they give him a very up-to-date kind of contemporary sort of thing. And it kind of is this transition of American Eagle into the modern age. Mm-hmm. I mean, actually this Imperialism is such a big thing. It is the American Eagle we have from now on, who is, rather than being this like anachronistic sort of bunch of references all bundled together, this caricature of, Native Americans, it's like a person that better represents the contemporary struggle of Indian people. And he's just really, really cool in that respect. I did want to mention one last thing. It was a quote that I found on Wikipedia I wanted to read real quick. I just think it really sums up like where the character comes from and where he's gone. This is from Lauren Sankovich, who's a Marvel editor, and she said, "For a character whose total appearances I could count on my fingers, not to mention having some of the worst costumes in the history of tacky superhero wear, I felt American Eagle had such a tremendous potential within the Marvel U as a whole. With his strong identification to his Native American heritage and disaffected attitude towards the larger superhero community, he's a principled man with his own brand of justice. Pair that with his bone-dry sense of humor and take all comers power set, he's a force to be reckoned with." And I just thought, oh, that's totally correct.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. He seems like the prime example of a character that's been established for a while that can survive like an update.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really kind of took him a while. Yeah, I think he's helped by the fact that he he appeared in Marvel 2-in-1, which is this sort of like, I don't know, new spotlight kind of character. And then he's appeared in other people's comics, but never as just their particular sidekick or something like that. So he's just kind of shown up every once in a while, and it's allowed him to be this kind of independent character.
I mean, people love a dry sense of humor.
True.
Mm-hmm. So that's American Eagle.
Man, we have good choices.
All right, so comic book recommendation time?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'll kick it off with it's pretty hard to find a good shaman book unless you did the original, his first interaction, or just really reading any of Alpha Flight. But I wanted to do something a little more current that still involves shaman because I know it's easier to find, especially digitally. So there's Chaos War Alpha Flight #1, or just the whole volume. It was in 2010 by Jim McCann. And essentially what happens is the original members, Guardian, Vindicator, Shaman, and Marina, come back together to pretty much battle life and death. So it's an interesting thing for them to all come back to fight this big, threat. So, I mean, it's nice. You get to see them more drawn contemporarily, and the story is more fresh. So if you don't like to read older comics, I know there's some of you out there.
I had the same fight, so it's hilarious. I know, because I was like, my heart says recommend The Movement, the modern one with Gail Simone on it. Mm-hmm. That was in the New 52. But my head says, let's start with Gen 13 Volume 1, which was in the 90s. This character's awesome, guys. She's only been around since the 90s. You can do your research, you can do your homework, and read all of her issues, okay? So Gen 13 Volume 1 was written by Jim Lee and Brendan Choi. Illustrations, like I said, up top, J. Scott Campbell. And like I said, it takes place in the Wildstorm universe from Image Comics. So this is before they were like very in the DC continuity. Mm-hmm. But think of it as like a Teen Titans for that Image universe, the Wildstorm universe. So
yeah. If you like Teen Titans, read that.
Ensemble Chaos.
So my recommendation is Thunderbolts by Warren Ellis and Mike Deodato.
Yeah, you already recommended that.
Well, I mentioned them in the spotlight for one, but also look, this character in this story, it's this is during the Registration Act period, like in the wake of Civil War.
Oh yeah.
And this was like the team of like sort of villains or whatever. So American Eagle fits this weird place in all this because he's like part of an American Indian reservation and an Indian nation, and they're exempt from a lot of law. So he exists in this weird area. But this is again that redefining moment, and there is a scene. There's like 3 issues that are right smack dab in this. That I want you to read the whole thing because it's really good. But he has an altercation. I'm not going to tell you much more about it with Bullseye, and let's just say American Eagle does not disappoint. Yeah, it's very cool.
You should send me those panels.
I will. Yeah.
Okay.
I could just see the American police being, that the like America, fuck yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Once he defeats Bullseye. So,
hell yeah.
That's where I was going with that.
America, fuck yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Till next time.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Phantom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.